Okay, here we go. Chapter 1, our first PowerPoint for the semester. I know that it's going to be tempting to just um, skip over these PowerPoints and not listen to the voice part, but I want to make sure that I want to really encourage you to listen to the voice portion. There are going to be a lot of things that I'm going to explain, stories that I'm going to use to help you understand. If you skip through the just reading the PowerPoint slides, you're going to miss a lot of what you need to know. So uh, I, I can only encourage you as we start Chapter 1, the impact of fire prevention on fire department operations. I want to encourage you to go through the whole PowerPoints, listening to my voice, and they won't all have voice. Uh, the first six are definitely going to have voice because there's a lot of foundational information that I need to explain. But the last half of the class, there won't be as much of my talking on each one. Okay, so let's get started here. Here's our learning objectives for Chapter 1, and it kind of applies to the other PowerPoint that you're going to watch. You need to watch two PowerPoints for Chapter 1. There's a separate one on the history of fire prevention, which is our fourth learning objective here. Explain the process of how historical fires and disasters have shaped fire prevention and the codes inspectors use. There's a lot of resistance to fire prevention out there. A lot of people don't want to spend the money to have a fire prevention bureau. Politicians, it's kind of hard to convince them to pay for prevention. It's like paying for insurance. Just don't want to do it. And there's a lot of businesses out there. They see us as coming in, trying to make them spend money that they don't want to spend. They don't see the big picture that a safer environment actually saves them more money. So let's get to it here. Why is fire prevention important? That's a picture of me on the left there. Can this sprinkler system prevent that fire on the right? And that's something that we need to show people that this devastating fire that burns down this beautiful old home could have been prevented with fire sprinklers and with proper maintenance of their home. So our job is to get out there and educate people and make for places where it's safer. So now I want you to notice that was a little selfie of me. That's me on the left. And I was looking through the bottom part of my glasses. I have bifocals, and that's why I got that picture with me kind of looking up in the air. Um, when you do selfies like that, you get a selfie that kind of goes up your nose. So I wasn't trying to show you my nostrils. I was trying to see through my glasses better and got a funny picture there. So that's a riser for a sprinkler system next to me. Sprinklers would have saved that building. So one of the concepts to understand here is how we can shape the battlefield. In battle, in the military, anybody who's taken this class that's been in the military understands these concepts. In battle, being in control of where you fight is critical. So if you have the high ground or the right angles or the right kind of cover, this makes a huge difference in warfare. Now, a perfect example of this was Napoleon. Napoleon was not a king. Napoleon was a common man who was in the military and worked his way up through the ranks because he was a great military tactician. After he got control of the military, then he became a dictator. And he tried to control the whole world. He was a dictator, he was a tyrant, but he was a great strategist and a great military tactician. And this picture shows you why. Napoleon would spend hours looking at maps, and he always tried to bring the battle to where he wanted it, where his troops had the advantage of high ground, where his cavalry was able to hide in the forest and then rush upon the enemy. He always sought to choose where he fought. Well, this applies to the fire service as well. If we can control the battlefield, if we know what's in every building, if we have the proper kind of fire protection systems, then we can have a better chance of saving these buildings and doing our job well. So, how does fire prevention shape the battlefield? By determining where hydrants will be located. Did you know that there are laws as to the spacing of hydrants? We require key boxes so we can get into buildings easier. We control the fire department access with fire lanes around buildings. We have laws that tell us they got to tell us what they're doing inside the buildings and what kind of hazardous materials they have. We're going to control, we're going to require fire alarm control panels, fire department connections. We're going to determine that the buildings, how close buildings can be, because we're trying to prevent conflagrations like we will talk about in our historical section. So all of this is a way where we're trying to shape. The problem is that a lot of firefighters don't appreciate this. We need a paradigm shift. Firefighters, a paradigm shift, what does that mean? A paradigm is a way of thinking or a cultural perspective. So now firefighters have a perspective, many of them, that fire prevention is unnecessary or is even bad for the fire department. And this, of course, is ridiculous. We need a paradigm shift. We need to change the thinking of firefighters. So our culture definition is a culture is the norms and attitudes and beliefs of people. So we want to change the culture in the fire service because firefighters often think of, well, first of all, they love to fight fires. So they want there to be fires. And a lot of them will say, well, I wasn't hired for prevention. I was hired to fight fires and to do EMS. It's not my job. And yet they don't realize that fire prevention makes their job easier and it makes it safer. I mean, what is our calling? To protect and to save human life, property, and the environment. And that's our job. So, we need the fire chief and the company officers and our governmental officials to force a change on firefighters and to help them see how important fire prevention is. We all can make a difference on this. So, what is the most important thing that firefighters do? What's our most important service? Is it EMS? Well, of course, that's what we do more than anything else. EMS is the top type of run that we go on. Is it fire suppression? Well, that's important. It's very important. But could it be that the most important thing we do is fire prevention? And nobody is going to give you a Medal of Honor for something that you prevented from happening. Fire suppression is more exciting. The red lights and the sirens, they get all the attention. It's exciting, it's sensationalistic, and we're seen as heroes. But when we prevent a fire, aren't we just as much, or maybe even more so, a greater hero? So why isn't fire prevention embraced? Why don't more firefighters embrace fire prevention? Well, the attitude is it puts us out of business. When I first went into fire prevention, I didn't want to. In fact, a little bit about my life, as I told you before, I was a firefighter, mostly worked in the Santa Clarita area, but LA County's big, and I worked in Commerce and Carson and Azusa, and I worked around, but mostly I worked out in Santa Clarita where I live. And I was on an engine, then I was on a truck, then I got my ideal dream job. I got on a fire patrol. And the fire patrolmen drive like a pickup truck, but like a big one, like an F-350 type of pickup with a cab and then a big tool chest type of thing in the back with a small pump, 150 to 300 feet of inch hose, um, and a and some water. I'm sorry, had a little brain fart there. So I liked that job, but the fire department canceled all their fire patrols as a budget cut, and I lost my position. So I was encouraged to go into the paramedic program. Well, I didn't want to go. And I just said, no, 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 I don't want to be a paramedic. No, I want to be a firefighter. And then they made me. They forced me into it. So I went into the paramedic program, kicking and screaming, didn't want to do it. And then I got in there and I started learning, and I loved it. And eventually I realized that in fact, I was the valedictorian of my class. I thought, this is great. As a paramedic, I can really do a lot of good. So I became a paramedic. I loved it so much. I'd taken the engineer's exam before I went into the paramedic program, and it came time for me to be promoted. And I said, oh, I don't want to promote. I don't want to be an engineer. I love being a paramedic. I don't want to change. And then my chief and my captain came to me and they said, Randy, that would really, really be stupid if you passed on an engineer's promotion. So I took the promotion. And then I became an engineer. And at first it was really hard, and there was a lot of learning and a lot of change. And then I realized, this is the greatest job ever. I loved it. And do you see a pattern here? And so then I was an engineer for 15 or so years. And as I got a little older, I started having some health issues, and messed up my shoulders. I messed up my back. And my captain said, I think you should go in fire prevention and give your body a break. And I said, I'm not doing that. HE double hockey sticks, no. No, 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 no. I don't want to work in an office. I don't want to have a cubicle and a desk and do filing. And oh, no, no, no. I don't want to do that. And then I got hurt again. And one of my buddies, one of my fellow firefighters that I knew real well, came to me and he said, hey, Randy, I'm in an ideal fire prevention position, and it's in Santa Clarita. You would be the schools and institutions inspector for Santa Clarita. It's a great job. If you got to work in fire prevention, this is the job. And after kicking and screaming and not really wanting to do it, and he wanted to work at my station because he lived in Castaic where I worked. So we traded, and I went into fire prevention, and it was hard, and there was so much to learn, and there's just tons of codes, and it was really hard at first. But as time went on, I realized how important it was and how powerful. I just want to say important. It's an important job because we can make a huge impact on the fire problem in our communities through prevention. Now, one day I went by Fire Station 73 after I'd been a firefighter for a little while, or a fire inspector, and I wanted to stop by and have lunch with the guys. And so I said, hey, you guys mind if I buy in for lunch and hang out with you? And one of my old friends says, well, I don't know, now that you're the enemy, I'm not sure we want you to do that. And I'm like, what do you mean the enemy? He goes, well, we're firefighters and we put out fires, and you try and make fires not happen, so you're the enemy. And I was shocked at that kind of an attitude, and yet there are a lot of firefighters that think that way. A lot of firefighters think it's boring. And that's what I thought before, that I would be bored to tears. That, I just didn't like the sounds of it. But then when I got out there and started doing it, I realized that I could make a huge impact. In fact, I will tell you the story later on in another PowerPoint of a situation where I may have saved hundreds of lives just by fire prevention. So the reality is that fire prevention is more economical than suppression. It's hard to convince politicians and the public to pay for trying to prevent bad things from happening. It's kind of like paying for insurance. Does anybody like to pay for car insurance? Car insurance is like, you might as well throw money down the toilet, right? Until you get in an accident. And then you realize, oh, I really needed that insurance. So, in actuality, the money that we spend on fire prevention could save us from enormous losses. Any business that has a major fire, especially one where somebody dies, almost, I don't know the exact statistic, but it's like 90%. They almost all go bankrupt. Bankrupt. So wouldn't it be better to have spent the money before and prevent a fire from happening than thinking, oh, that's what I got insurance for. If we have a fire, we'll just rebuild and start all over again. That's a bad, bad way to think. So how do we change this culture? How do we get people to think a different way? Well, we have to get people on our side. And one of the ways is through statistics. In the 1970s, we're going to talk about this in Chapter 2, but a study was done that was commissioned by President Nixon called America's Burning. And they produced this book called America's Burning, and it talked about how bad the American fire problem is with statistics. And they also showed where what could we do to change that? How can we change the American fire problem? So, basically, statistics don't lie. And it's easy to show that since the 1970s, since America's Burning, the fire problem in America has improved. So we've got to start at the top. We've got to start with our chiefs, our city councilmen, our county supervisors, and we start at the top of an organization, and we get people to promote fire prevention. And our company officers need to lead by example in each station. I had fire captains that really saw prevention as an important part of our job, and some that just pretended that, in fact, some that actually would write down that we did inspections that we never did. That's falsification of records. That's a criminal act. Not only a dereliction of duty, it's criminal. These are governmental records, and deliberately falsifying them can get you in deep, deep trouble, can get you fired. So don't do that. Well, good fire prevention is going to equal effective emergency operations. We need to convince all the firefighters that we're actually there for them. We can set up that battlefield we talked about and maintain it to our advantage. In a fire like this apartment fire would be, if it was in the back of an apartment complex, to get water from the hydrant on the street to the apartment in the back would require, first of all, a fire lane. And the fire lane won't be there unless we make them put it there. But if there isn't a fire lane, we would have to drag hose through the middle of the complex. That would be a nightmare. But if there is a driveway for people to get to their cars and their garages, we would have to pull engines back there. Well, if this is like 1,200 feet, in the back of an apartment complex, we would have to do a relay hose operation where one engine connects to the hydrant on the street, and then they lay out their hose to the next engine, and they connect to that, and then they pump to the next engine, who pumps to the next engine, who pumps to the fire. It takes time to do that. Now the fire's worse. Every second that we let the fire increase in intensity makes it harder to put that fire out. So it's to our advantage as firefighters that we have good fire prevention. So how does fire prevention support fire ground operations? We do it by being involved in the full life of every building in the district, from the cradle to the grave. From the concept of a building, the architects work on their drawings and they turn it into the building official, who makes them turn it into fire prevention, and we play a part in the plans. We play a part in the building and inspecting it, and we play a part in overseeing that building throughout its life. We even play a part when they tear that building down. So how do we do that? We do it through the 3 E's of fire prevention. And these are essential concepts that we're going to talk about all through this class: engineering, education, and enforcement. The 3 E's of fire prevention. So with engineering, well, what is that? Well, we play a part in the construction document review. We say what they can and can't do based on what they're going to do in that building. We look at the plans, we compare them to the codes and the ordinances, and we make them make changes. And we're talking about every nail, every screw, every concrete block, every rebar has to be done to a certain code. And so we're involved in that whole building construction process, and we're going to inspect to make sure that as they build it as the plans say. So sometimes we'll show up and they're trying to cut corners to make money, and they're using the wrong kind of pipe. It's up to us as the inspectors to make sure that it's built according to the plans and catch them doing things like that. In our engineering, we're going to determine where the hydrants are, where the fire lanes are, and how wide they are, and how wide the roads are. In a commercial area, the roads are going to be wider. In a residential area, they may be narrower, but they can only go to a certain, they can't get any narrower than a certain amount. We're going to have the say-so on fire sprinklers and alarms and all sorts of fire protection equipment. And since 2012, now in California, we require residential fire sprinklers in every home that's built since then. We're also going to be concerned about making sure that fire and smoke don't transfer from one room to another, from the rooms to the hallways, from one floor level to another. So we do this with fire barriers, and we do it with smoke removal. We're going to talk about the MGM fire, and in the MGM fire, over 100 people died, and none of them were burned. They all died from smoke inhalation. So we want to make sure that that doesn't ever happen again. So we manage and we control smoke in many different ways. So we require fans and clean stairwells and fire-rated doors and fire-rated windows and all of these kinds of things. Our second E, though engineering is first in the sense of process, this one should be first in the sense of priority. Education is how we make a huge impact on society. We educate people, at the elementary school level, senior citizens. I actually do a program where I go to senior citizens' homes and talk to them about fire safety. for senior citizens. We could save thousands of lives through education. How many of you in this class heard about Stop, Drop, and Roll when firefighters came to your school? We educate the young and the old, and we're trying to make that culture shift, that paradigm shift, by educating the young on how to think about fire safety, not to play with matches, to be, safe in your home. So we do the exit drills in the home, and we pass out um, um, like plans of how they can draw out their home and show where their smoke detectors are. So we're going to do that in this class. That's your first project above and beyond your introduction you did. Hopefully you've already done that. You need to download the smoke detector plan, draw out your home, and show where the smoke detectors are. Now, here's what the law says. The law says there should be one in every sleeping room, every bedroom, and every room leading to a sleeping room, so every hallway. Or sometimes there are bedrooms that are off of the living room or something like that. Well, then there has to be one in the living room. Don't put them in the kitchen. They're just going to go off all the time. You don't want to have smoke detectors in the kitchen. You want to have your carbon monoxide detector in a very common area of the home. And you want to make sure that you've got all those smoke detectors. Now, if you don't have them, you need to go out and buy some and make sure that there's one in every room. Also, you need to make sure that your batteries are working. If it's making that obnoxious little chirp, chirp sound, that means the battery's bad. So spend a couple of bucks and go out there and get a 9.5 battery and put it in and keep your smoke detectors working. They may save your life. Okay? So that's why we're doing that project, and make sure you get it uploaded by the due date so that you can get credit for that. But we do this not just for the points, but for your safety. It's my way of educating you about safety in your home. If you have fire extinguishers, show where you have those. I have 3 in my home, and it's a good idea to have them. Not required, though. Smoke detectors are required. The last E of fire prevention is enforcement. Did you know that fire prevention inspectors are the only agency that are allowed to enter businesses, all businesses, everywhere except for personal residences, on an annual basis? We're allowed to go in and make sure that what we engineered the building to be built as stays in compliance. Are the alarms working? Are the sprinkler system? Have they been maintained? Do they get their maintenance and their service every 5 years? And all of these things. We're out there making sure that the exits are clear and doors aren't locked that's supposed to be left open, and that there are exit signs and all of this kind of stuff. That's our job to enforce, and we want to make sure that they comply with the code, that they have the proper type, placement, and maintenance of their fire protection and alarm components. Another part of enforcement is making sure, well, what do they do in there? We give permits for hazardous processes, and we want to know what kind of hazardous materials do they have. These are called the CUPA laws, and the fire department has been given the responsibility of enforcing those. So when we go out and find out, that they have methyl ethyl bad stuff there, then we make them put up an NFPA 704 diamond like this that gives firefighters an idea of the hazards that are inside that building. There's an infamous story in Kansas City of firefighters that were sent to a construction site in a small fire. They were told that there was a truck on fire and possibly a outbuilding, and they got there and it was a highway construction site, And it was mentioned over the radio that there might be explosives on the construction site. But when they got there, some security guards pointed out the burning truck and the burning building, and there was no acknowledgement or giving them of information that this building had explosives in it. In fact, it had what's called ANFO, ammonium nitrate fuel oxidizers. If you never heard of ANFO, it's the product that was used by the Oklahoma City bombers who bombed the FBI building, brought down a whole building with ANFO. So it's a very, very horrible explosive. It's used a lot by terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a lot of IEDs are made out of it. So if they had known that, the horrible thing that happened to them wouldn't have. That building blew up, and all 5 firefighters were killed. There was barely anything left of their fire engine. It was a horrible, horrible thing. And they were just doing their job, putting a building out, putting a building fire out, but they did not know what was inside. It's our job in fire prevention to make sure that we know what's inside every building. And that familiarity can help us give technical support to the fire crews. So one of the things that some fire chiefs and those that are anti-fire prevention will say is, well, we're wasting personnel. No, you're not. Prevention personnel are going to do their job, but they can also be used as part of the firefighting teams, especially on our larger fires. They can be used to fill incident command system positions, and they can bring technical support because they know what's in that building and what kind of hazards are there. So a lot of times fire prevention personnel will be brought into the bigger fires and the bigger hazmat incidents and things like that. So it's not a waste of their money. It's a good use of their money. Well, last couple of slides here. Before we go into the next section about historical fires, why is it important that we learn the historical impact of fire codes? So, does anybody like it when your parents tell you to do something, you say why, and they say, because I told you so? You know what? Nobody likes that. Nobody does. And if we can understand why codes are there, it helps us to explain it to people. So you're required to watch the station fire video. I'm not doing that to be macabre or to be, it's gross. It's a horrible thing to have to watch. I want you to watch it because I want you to realize that when you're enforcing exiting laws, you're doing your best to make sure this doesn't happen again. I mean, when some restaurant owner says, well, to move these tables and chairs out of the way of the exit is going to cost me customers and cost me money. And you can explain what happened in the Kiss fire or the Lame Horse fire or the station fire or the Iroquois Theater fire and how people died because they couldn't get out. That's a much stronger impact than because the code says so, right? Of course. You see, we need to understand that the code is written in the blood of disaster victims. I know that kind of sounds a little macabre, it's kind of gross, but it's the reality. When disasters happen and people die needlessly, that affects the public. And the public and the news and the press, that there's a public outcry and they put pressure on the government. And that leads to the government making new laws. So we need to understand that there's a cycle of change. When bad things happen, it leads to public outcry, and public outcry leads to new laws, and those new laws will hopefully prevent it from happening again. Now, there are other reasons that we get new laws: technological advances, statistical studies that are done, but mostly this historical perspective is what forms and shapes the code and hopefully will keep from reoccurring tragedies. We haven't had a conflagration like the Great Chicago Fire in a very, very long time because we've changed the way our downtown buildings are built. So we use these disasters when we're enforcing the code to compare them to similar situations when we're out there doing inspections. There's a long list of code changing fires. There's many of them. So just a few of them that we're going to talk about in the next PowerPoint. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, where 147 young women died in a fire, many of them jumping out the windows to the street below from the 9th and 10th floor. The Iroquois Theater Fire, where 602 women and children mostly died because the exit doors swung inside and they could not open them. The Coconut Grove Fire, where 409, almost 500 people died because of interior finishes that were extremely flammable, and the fire spread faster than anybody could have imagined. Our Lady of Angel School, where children and nuns died, and because of a lack of exits and because of paper all over the walls. The Beverly Hills Supper Club fire that it says here Beverly Hills, California. That's not where it was. It was in Kentucky. 164 lives lost. The Station nightclub fire just in 2003. I was in fire prevention when this happened. That was right around when I went in fire prevention. It was just before. Over 100 people, it's more than 100, died in this building where exits were blocked. And the One Meridian Plaza fire and the MGM Hotel fire, which I mentioned earlier, where about 87, it was actually more like 100 people died as a result of smoke spread throughout the building. People went into the stairways and hallways to try and escape and were met with superheated air and toxic gases and smoke that killed them. So these fires, these disasters, they led to code changes like panic hardware, sprinklers, better exits and more exits, better fire detection systems, better construction and roads. All of these things have made an enormous impact on the fire prevention situation. So, do fire codes impact firefighter safety? Yeah, it's going to make it better for us as firefighters, not just for the public. Okay, after you're done with this, watch the next slideshow, the PowerPoint on historical fires.